This is the Retro Tech News for August 14th, 2018, brought to you in part by Pogo Linux. Those lovable super nerds over at Pogo Linux can design a server that would just make your head explode. Seriously, go to pogolinux.com. Check out some of their servers and see, just as a test, how much storage and RAM you can stick in some of these rack mount units. They are insane. Anyway, check it out. They're awesome. They support the show. Let's start off the show today by saying happy birthday to the IBM personal computer. That's right, the IBM PC was released on August 12th, way back in 1981, which I believe, if my math is holding up, that was about 10,000 years ago. It had, when it was released, and until 8088 processor running at 4.77 megahertz. Here's something I love about that. Not only are we measuring it in megahertz, but instead of gigahertz and the like, but we are actually going down to 2 decimal places when we measure it. That's how long ago this was, and that machine was still valuable, useful, and did a lot of cool stuff. It shipped on board with 16K of RAM that were actually just on the board itself. You could expand it up to 640K through the use of, I think, 4 ISA slots. There was multiple ISA slots. I want to say it was 4, but you put 4 basically little ISA cards in there, and you could get up to 640K, but that was unheard of back then. It did not come with a floppy drive at all. The original IBM PC literally shipped with, at least in the entry-level model, with the ability to read off of a cassette drive. Yeah, just like a Commodore 64 and the like, with the cassette tape option. It was a little cassette. There's no hard drive, no floppy, no nothing, and was running PC-DOS version 1.0 and shipped for a measly $1,565. That's totally true. Now, the operating system that ran on this thing way back when was PC-DOS 1.0, which was originally written by a guy named Tim Patterson up in Seattle, Washington, and it was originally called Quick and Dirty Operating System, or QDOS. They later renamed it to 86DOS for running on an 8086, series of processors, and that was licensed by Microsoft. Microsoft purchased it later, but initially they just licensed it, and it was modified by a guy named Bob O'Rear. And Bob O'Rear took 86DOS, or Quick and Dirty DOS, and modified it into PC-DOS 1.0, basically just changing the name and adding in support for the specific IBM PC, the 5150, that very first IBM PC. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, these are interesting names. Tim Patterson, Bob O'Rear, what are those? Who are those guys? This is what they look like. So the guy on the far left there, let me see, there, right there, in black and white there, that's Tim Patterson. If you've ever used DOS, you really owe a lot to that guy right there. He did a lot. Now, really what he created was sort of a clone of CP/M, which was Gary Kildall's system from Digital Research. But that's a whole nother story. But that guy right there is the Quick and Dirty DOS guy. Now, Bob O'Rear, let's see, he is that guy right behind Bill Gates. You see that really, I'm finding my finger spots really hard for this. That's Bill Gates right there, young Bill Gates. And right above Bill Gates with that awesome stash and that red kind of vinyl looking shirt with the flip collar there, he's the one on the very far side. That's Bob O'Rear. He's the guy that took 86DOS, Quick and Dirty DOS, and turned it into PC-DOS 1.0. I always think it's interesting to put kind of faces to these names, but these 11 core people from Microsoft were some of the original. This picture was kind of famous for being the original Microsoft people. But anyway, there they are. Now, that original machine could be upgraded. You could get fancier models of it that had more than 16K of RAM. 16K of RAM, holy moly. You could get it with 64K of RAM, a floppy drive, and don't get too excited. That 5 1/4 inch floppy drive was a very small 160K floppy drive, and a monochrome monitor. That's right, that initial one, no monitor. You hooked it up to a TV set or some sort of an additional monitor that you already have. But this upgraded version cost $3,000. Let's say you wanted to really deck it out, right? Let's say you wanted 2 floppy drives and a color monitor to go with it. Well, that would run you about $4,500 back then. I don't know, that probably works out to about $70 bazillion in modern day monies. But this is what she looked like. That is the IBM PC 5150. That is the computer that really started PC clones becoming a thing later on. Truly an awesome machine and an awesome case. Big old switch. You see on the far back left-hand side, you see a big black area there. That's where the switch is. It was a big old toggle switch. I have a very soft spot in my heart for those big clunkety toggle power switches, the kind that you'd almost expect to see like in a 1950s sci-fi movie. It's not quite as intense as like a big lever where you go cha-chink and you see sparks fly and everything like that, but it's close to that. Anyway, hats off to Foztex for posting that picture, just because it looked great. And happy birthday to the IBM PC, and thanks for all you did. All right, let's talk about preserving old games for a little bit. This is coming up a lot right now because of a variety of reasons, but one of which is that there's been lawsuits, and there's been lawsuits for a long time, but there's been lawsuits that have been resulting in actual huge websites that catalog information and binaries for older games that have been taken down completely. Specifically, I'm talking about EmuParadise. Now, EmuParadise has been around a long time, and before I guess I go too much further, I should say I do not condone nor support software piracy. Please do not go out and steal things. I have to say all of that. But here's the thing, is these sites collect, like EmuParadise. You could go there, and it wasn't just a website where you could search for a ROM file for the Super Nintendo, say, Super Mario World, something like that, right? And download it. It wasn't just that. It also collected together screenshots and box art and factoids and historical information about these sorts of games. And in many ways, it was sort of a retro video gaming museum. And it is shutting down, and that is, or changing at the very least, but essentially shutting down for all intents and purposes. And that is a very sad thing that's happening. If you go to emuparadise.me, you can find more information on it. But I'm going to read just a little snippet from here. This is a blog post that they put up that says EmuParadise is changing. Many of you are aware that the situation with regards to emulation sites has been changing recently. What you probably don't know is that we at EmuParadise have been dealing with similar issues for all 18 years of our existence. From receiving threatening letters in the early days to our hosts suddenly shutting down our servers due to complaints, we've seen it all. We've always complied with takedown requests, but as you can see, that is no guarantee of anything. I started EmuParadise 18 years ago because I never got to play many of these amazing retro games while growing up in India, and I wanted other people to be able to experience them. Over the years, many folks have joined in and contributed to this vision, and I think I can say that we've been successful in spreading our passion for retro games far and wide. Well, this is sad. I mean, this is terribly sad that this sort of thing is happening, and EmuParadise is not the only one. The thing that bothers me here is that this is reducing the availability of some of the best games that have ever been made in the history of mankind. I mean, the reality is, so many of these games are truly phenomenal, and people would nowadays pay for them if the price was at least somewhat reasonable. I did a poll over on Twitter of this, and I said it, and I quote, if Nintendo made ROM images of your favorite Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy games available for sale, for say something reasonable like $10, would you buy them? 64% responded heck yes, 28% responded with nah, I'd pirate them, and 8% responded with the incorrect answer, and they said nope old games are dumb. But the important part to focus on here is that 64% that said heck yes. And bear in mind that this is going out to a highly technically literate audience, an audience that's already been dealing with the fact that they can't get these old games that they want to play, and they've been having to pirate them because there's no other option available to them for years. And so they're already in that mindset, which means their likelihood to pirate them is significantly higher than their likelihood to buy them, at least when compared to the mass populace. And yet, in that group, heck yes, they'd spend $10 per game. And a bunch of people commented on that. They're like, $10? No. But you know what? $5, $6? I'd go for that. And I'm with them. Honestly, I'd do $10 a game for some of my favorites. For there's some truly amazing games from, like Super Mario World, fantastic game, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and Earthbound, and so many other great Super Nintendo games. Going back to the original NES, the original Atari, the number of amazing games for these systems is off the charts. The original Commodore 64, so many great games. And I would absolutely pay for them if I could get them in a reasonable way and hold on to them forever. And the problem here is availability. Let me give you a sort of an example that breaks outside of the gaming world for a minute, just so we can kind of fully understand how ridiculous the situation we currently are in is. Imagine, close your eyes. Imagine the Beatles album, the classic Beatles album, Sgt. Pepper, with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely, that thing. Imagine if the Beatles said never again will that album be allowed to be sold on any medium. We will not allow any new CDs, tapes, no streaming services, no MP3s, nothing. We will just not allow it. Well, that would be basically a way of saying that we're going to take away this fundamental piece of music history, something that has inspired countless bands and music lovers across the world. Even if you're not super into the Beatles, there's no denying the impact that had on the world. And the Beatles own that music. It's theirs. Legally, they can do that. Legally, they could say, we never again want to produce any more of these records. We never again want to. And that would be sad, though. That would deprive not just past generations from continuing to enjoy what they made, but that would deprive future generations and current generations from getting to experience the same joys that their parents and grandparents did. This is sort of like with me and my kids. When my daughter became old enough to really enjoy video games, I started her out with retro stuff. And honestly, I started her out on mostly computer games. So we played a lot of old DOS and Commodore 64 games. Games like Reader Rabbit and Mixed Up Mother Goose from Sierra, which was an adventure game where you walk around and put fairy tales back together. But great games that helped her learn how to read. Games that gave her an appreciation and enjoyment of simple gameplay mechanics. It was amazing. And if those games simply were forbidden from existing, well, that makes her life worse. That makes my life worse. It makes everyone's life worse. Now, what if, on the other side of things, what if the Beatles said Sgt. Pepper would only exist and only allowed to be sold on a standalone device? Like, let's say it's called the Sgt. Pepper Gadget Listener. And that device only played Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that's all that device did. Well, at least then people would have the opportunity to enjoy it. That's sort of like what Nintendo does nowadays. They forbid everything, except for occasionally they'll come out with a limited run of a piece of hardware that has a handful, a dozen, a couple dozen of some truly great games. But then that misses out on literally hundreds and hundreds of games in the arsenal that were released for the NES, the Super NES, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Original, all of these systems. Heck, even the Virtual Boy had some real winners in there. In the original, the arcade games were truly great too. And the fact that that's a situation we're in nowadays means that people are missing out on some of the greatest games ever made. And that bums me out. So why I say all of this is I say to Nintendo, Release some of these games. Sell them. Sell them at insanely high prices. Make them $10 a ROM. Make them $50 a ROM. Make them the exact same price that you sold them at in cartridges originally, and all you get is the .rom file or whatever, right? I would buy them, at least some of them. And I know a lot of other people would too. And would people pirate them? Yeah, they would. But you know what? They already are. So if Nintendo would like a huge cash cow, or at the very least a quick way to increase their revenues a little bit, I would recommend releasing them. Not only would it make good business sense at this point, because the cat's out of the piracy bag. People are already ripping those ROMs and spreading them far and wide. You can't actually stop it. The best Nintendo and everyone else can do is shut down one or two websites here and there and make it hard for people. But give people a legit chance to do it. Look at Good Old Games. Or sorry, they've renamed themselves to GOG now. But look at GOG.com. Sell some of the greatest DOS games of all time. And you can buy them legit. And you can buy them free of DRM. And they'll bundle it with an emulator, DOSBox, ScumVM, something, and let it run on your system. That's great. Follow that model. Hell, partner with GOG and sell those games for $10, $15, $50 a pop, bundled with a sanctioned Super Nintendo, NES, etc. emulator. People would buy them. I would buy them. I would flock to them. I would report on it in this show. I would talk about it in articles. And I am not the only one. This all is one of the biggest reasons why I'm an advocate for open source. I came to be an advocate for open source not because I felt like it was a moral obligation to provide source code, but I love open source and free software. Initially, why I got into it, I expanded later, but initially was to preserve old pieces of software. The more I looked around into the world, I saw pieces of software that were glorious, that were no longer supported, that were no longer sold, and quickly being lost to time. You'd flip open old magazines, old computing and video game magazines, and you'd see references or advertisements even, or reviews of games, applications, all sorts of things, operating systems in some cases, with no way to get them. They're gone. And it's not that I deserve them. It's not that someone else made them and therefore they must be forced to give it to me for free. No. It's that what they did, those game makers, those operating system developers, etc., what they did was amazing. What they did made the world cooler. And it's sad to see that be lost. That's one of the reasons I love open source. But I'm not expecting Nintendo to go around releasing their source code. It would be cool if they did. But man, oh man, just take advantage of your IP, sell those ROMs, and make some bucks so we can at least have them without having to steal them. That'd be kind of nice. On that note, a lost video game has been found. The original South Park game. In fact, this was supposed to be the first South Park game that was ever released, just called South Park, for the Game Boy Color. It's been found. Yeah, it's literally been found. Here is a advertisement for it. There's Kenny in his little hoodie and South Park. And if you look down there, it's built by Acclaim, and there's a little Nintendo 64 logo, and right next to it is a Game Boy Color logo. This game was supposed to be released for the Game Boy Color, and it never got released. Well, that's all changing now. This is from LostMediaWiki.com. According to IGN, the game was to be released in 1999, which contradicts the previous knowledge that it was to be released in 1998. A Giant Bomb review was found that states that Acclaim's CEO at the time announced a direct sequel to be released in 2000. The game's listing also included a list price of $29.99. On August 6th, 2018, just, a week ago, the ROM of the game was posted by The Cool Dude, good name, on the Lost Media Wiki's Discord server after months of contact with the head developer of the game. This is legit. This is a 1990s Game Boy Color game that was a AAA title that was developed by Acclaim, licensed from Comedy Central, and was South Park, and it was lost. Here's what it looked like. Here's the main menu. There's Chef on a little Game Boy Color emulator thing rocking out there with a start game options and password. Oh man, remember when video games had passwords where you get a little jumbled set of characters and that would be what you'd enter in and it would shoot you ahead to that level with that number of lives and whatnot. Oh man, I miss that. Back when games didn't necessarily always have a save state, you just get a password. That was cool. And then here's a cut screen they've got. They go, hey Chef, you seen Kenny? But look at that, actually looks pretty good. I mean, you know, South Park's not exactly the highest definition show in the entire world, but it looks pretty good. And then here's the gameplay. Basically, it's a 2D platformer where you run and jump around. Now, this game was never released. However, Acclaim took this engine, ported it, and used it to make, I think, a couple different games, including Maya the Bee for the Game Boy Color. Fascinating. The fact that it's been found and made available is awesome, and I haven't heard of anyone making lawsuits about it, so that's even better. All right, this episode of the Retro Tech News, which is pretty game heavy except for the IBM thing, is brought to you in part by Purism. They release their stuff as open source, and they try their hardest to make their hardware open source too. They got an open BIOS, they got hardware kill switches, and the operating system PureOS, Linux-based, Debian-based, and Free Software Foundation approved. Find out more about their laptops and the phone they're working on over at Purism's website, puri.sm. And Lulzbot, they make 3D printers, which, let's just say you've got a Raspberry Pi. Hypothetical here. You want to put a whole lot of emulators on there, old computer emulators, old video game system emulators. You plug in some keyboards and controllers to that bad mamma jamma and hook it up to your TV. It works great. It'll play all sorts of things. But it doesn't look like a great little hunk of device. Like right here, this little guy, well, it looks okay, right? It's cool, but it needs a case. What you do is you get yourself a Lulzbot 3D printer, you go over to Thingiverse.com and you search for Raspberry Pi cases in retro styles. There's NES and Super NES, Commodore 64, old PC styles, Apple II. You can find pre-made models, .stl files you can download, print on that sucker, stick your Raspberry Pi in there, and bam, Bob's your uncle. You've got a really cool retro rig. So find out more over at lulzbot.com. And if you are watching this show for free, you're awesome. I love you. But who I love even more is those people that make it possible by supporting this show. The sponsors of this show, the patrons that subscribe to this show, get this show in MP3 and MP4 file formats. They can download them to your drive, archive them off on their NAS, do whatever they want with them. There's no DRM because I don't do that, son. And there's RSS feeds. You can't really go wrong with any of that. There's all sorts of other perks. There's a Discord server and all sorts of fun to be had. Go over to patreon.com/Brian Lunduke or lunduke.com for more links around that. And I would be remiss if I did not shout out to all of them. These are the 32-bit and higher sponsors of this show, and they are amazing, amazing people. They are spinning by there at rapid speeds. It just continues forever in a loop because that's how it works the best. Thank you to all of you sponsors. All of you are tremendous. Even from the lowest level up to the highest, you help keep the lights on here and help keep us rocking out. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with, what are we going to be back with? More shows. That's what we're going to be back with because that's what we do here